meeting for April. Board members in attendance. We have Brian Otley, we have Holly Groschner, we have myself. I see Dan Nelson has just joined. And I do know that Laura Sibilia is not able to join today, so she will not be in attendance. Christine, do you want to go over staff that's in attendance?
Yep, we have Rob Fish, Aaron Herzog, Tony Clithero, and Kristen Bringa. Alyssa will not be joining us today.
Okay. All right.
And neither will Lucy, by the way, sorry.
Okay. First item on the agenda is approval of, or first item is approval of the proposed agenda. I'm going to make a motion that we approve the agenda as submitted. Are there any changes or discussions to the agenda?
Nope.
Right, seeing none, hearing none. Let me take a second just to make sure I follow Robert's rules for the agenda. Give a second.
I'll second.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. You know what? I can only second for one of them, Patty. I'm sorry. I'll second for April.
No,
I
this
can
is
second for both of them. I just have to abstain from vote on the first one.
Gotcha. This is for the agenda still. We haven't even gotten to the minutes.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'm ahead of myself. Ahead of myself.
No worries. No worries. Any more discussion? We're moving right along.
Dan was dying to say no to something. I can't.
Consequence of being late.
All right, all those in favor of the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The ayes have it. Any abstentions or nays, I should say. Any nays? Hearing none, ayes have it. First item on the agenda for action is approval of minutes. Sure I'm in the right spot here for our agenda. First item is March 13th. I'll move that we approve the minutes for March 13th. Is there a second?
I can second both if you like to move both, Patty.
All right, let's do them all in one package. March 13th and April 10th is the motion now, and Holly has seconded that motion. Is there any discussion?
Nope.
And Dan, just abstain. Are you going to abstain, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? And abstentions? Dan Nelson has abstained because he was absent for one of the meetings. Okay, minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is introduction to framework for confidential legal issues. And Christine, I'll let you kick that off.
Yes, this is Tony. Tony is going to talk about first of all, we'll do a formal introduction to Tony in public session, but she's got some things to talk about in executive session around, Tony, why don't you go ahead and say legally exactly what you're going to do in executive session? That way I don't mess it up.
Thank you, Christine. Greetings, board. Nice to be here. My first meeting, and what I was hoping to be able to do is, have an opportunity in executive session to describe to you what I consider to be my role as an attorney to the board, and what the confines of the attorney-client privilege and attorney communications are in this context, and to make sure we're all on the same page with respect to the use of executive session and the open meetings law vis-a-vis the public records law, et cetera, et cetera. So just like an initial, just a few minutes to set the stage, set the canvas for what my role is and how to deliver on those services in the context of these public meetings.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Holly, you have your hand up?
I do. I think what Tony's going to tell us is very important and belongs on the record, not in executive session. However, Tony, if you have legal advice pertaining to a specific instance of implementing executive session or other concerns about policy interpretation, that advice should certainly be in executive session.
Yes, I believe that even though I'm not speaking about a specific policy issue, Holly, I'm speaking in terms of the giving you my opinion of the open meetings law and the attorney-client confidentiality provisions that govern my conduct. And
But
so,
you don't believe that that is something that we should be on the record with, or,
no, I believe that's an attorney-client communication.
okay.
Yeah, I have the same question, Tony, and I'm not sure. You know, my thinking is to be as transparent as possible. When it's specific attorney-client discussion where it would influence a policy decision or a particular legal matter, I completely agree we should move into executive session. I would prefer to stay in public session for this if we can.
Okay, well, I can tell you that as your attorney, I feel as though I need to speak to you in confidence with respect to the confines of the privilege and the communications to set the stage going forward for our communications. And this is in no way an attempt to prevent transparency. This is an attempt to bolster the attorney-client the importance of our attorney-client communications, which you know do benefit from. It's one of the few things that I believe does benefit from confidentiality, so that you understand that your communications with me are confidential, etc. So I don't need a lot of time. I just want to set the table if that's possible.
I move that we adjourn to executive session. Is there a link set up for that purpose?
Yes, there is. Rob has set up a link. Once we get in there, Tony's gonna have to invite me in though, because it didn't necessarily work because I'm the
That's-
organizer.
You should get a notification or automatically be moved when I open up the room.
So we would be in executive session and I would ask the board to invite Tony and I to the session.
All right, I'll second that with the invitations as noted. Is there any further discussion?
Okay, I'm
All
gonna
right,
open up the meeting.
With that, we'll move into executive session.
Okay, Tony, you should also, perfect.
Okay. I'll wait to see if I get invited. I think I'll leave this session.
No, you stay here until you get the invite. If you leave this, you won't be receiving notification.
Okay. It doesn't appear to be working. Okay, got it.
Rob Fish, this is where I feel like you should break out in song or something.
All right, let us know when we are all here. Get everybody back. Christina's Holly, there's Holly.
Yep, I think we're all here.
All right, that moves us. Let's, is there anything else on item 3? For the legal
Nope.
framework discussion?
No,
Okay,
No,
I'll just
thank you.
report that no action was taken in executive session. It is now 12:34 and we are back in public session. No action was taken in as the short executive session item. Okay, let's move on to item 4 of our agenda, which is a discussion of the auditor's report. And I'm going to lead this. And let me get to my packet. In our board packet on PDF page 12, you'll see a lengthy memo. As we discussed at our last board meeting, we went through staff's response to the auditor's report. And what I pledged to do after that discussion that we had was to basically start a process to respond from the board's perspective, the VCCB board, to respond to the risks identified in the auditor's report that was issued on March 21st, 2023. So in that, in our packet, I'm just going to go through a little bit of my introductory piece here and then tee up the risks. But specifically, the auditor stated in the document that the risks identified in this report do not represent an exhaustive list, but represent factors that, if left unaddressed, could jeopardize Vermont meeting its broadband goals. The risks below represent threats to Vermont's ambitious plan to utilize the CUD model to deliver universal, affordable broadband access to every Vermont address. These risks are informed by our review of CUD contracts and grant agreements, VCBB, Vermont Communication Union District Association, and CUD board meeting minutes and materials, dozens of interviews, and relevant legislation. Based on this report, so hopefully we all have had a chance to take a review of the report. I see this as a really terrific time for us to take a breath. I kind of characterize it as an opportunity to pause. Through the last 2 years, we have all been discussing the need for various policies and procedures and guidelines. And we all have recognized that. We've thrown some of that at the parking lot. Some of it we have addressed a few items in terms of policy structure. But quite simply, we haven't had the time to be super thoughtful and do the groundwork that is necessary to develop policies and procedures and do a lot of the stuff that's actually been identified in the auditor's report. So a lot of the things in the 10 risks that were identified, I think we've covered a lot of the ground verbally over the last 2 years. And this becomes an opportunity for us. I look at this as a positive report in the sense that it gives us, and timing of the report also coincides that we have time in terms of staff. We're finally up to speed with more staff. Whereas 2 years ago, it was just Christine and the 5 of us as board members coming at it. There's no way for us to have developed policies on day 1 of VCBB time. So I really look at this as an opportunity, not a threat, but an opportunity. And my goal with this memo is to tee us up in a process. I don't anticipate we are going to tick off today all 10 of these risk items, but what I'd like to do is, the idea that I would like to propose is that we go through each of the 10 risks that were identified in the report, and we identify what policies do we need around this risk, if any. What procedures do we need around this risk, again, if any. And it's at this stage, I'm looking at this as identification stage of what's needed. And then that will allow us via staff to develop policies that we can chew on and debate and come back and forth with. So I hope that's a good introduction to kind of what I see as a several month process to go through the risks. And what I'd like to propose today is that we at least talk about 3, because there's 10 of them. And we have about an hour for this topic, so I'm trying to stay true to the agenda and time-wise. But if the VCBB board is open for this kind of dialogue, what I'd like to do is use it as a working time, that we go through the risks, we tackle at least 3 per meeting, and then we get through them all. And along the way, we identify policies that need to be developed. And what I'm envisioning is, Tony, you're probably going to end up doing a lot of writing for us. To me, this really falls into the bandwidth of a legal attorney coming and saying, okay, here's a policy related to this particular issue that we've identified, and then we would go back and forth with that policy over a few meetings to process and digest.
Yes, I agree, Patty.
And the other thing that I really want, thank you, Tony. The other thing I really want to be clear about is I want this very much in public session. And I want to also invite VCUDA and the CUDs to work with us to develop these policies. I really want to do this as a collaborative effort. It's at the end of the day, it's a VCBB policy, but I want to make sure we have sufficient input time. It doesn't have to be in a meeting, after hours time to work with VCUDA and others to make sure we're getting these policies right. And I'm also, Laura sent an email, and I would just like to chime in with her email because she's not here today. Give me a second to pull that up. So Laura wrote, she apologized for missing the meeting regarding the auditor's report on funding gaps. I'm concerned that we are not actively and visibly working on financing measures. There are a myriad of ways we could do that. If there is not a work group with VCUDA exploring different financing approaches, I'd like to see us establish one ASAP with VCUDA.
So that goes to risk number 2.
Yes. So I just wanted to make sure that Laura's comment on that particular risk was read into the record. Okay, with that, thought I saw some hands up. Christine, your hand is up.
Yeah, actually, I think Holly was first, so I'll defer to her first.
Oh, sorry, Holly, I've got a bar over part of my.
Totally understand, Patty, and thank you, Christine. First of all, Patty, I want to take the moment to recognize your efforts to get this ball rolling and really appreciate this thoughtful memo so very much. So thank you very much. And, I think this is absolutely the right position for the board to be in, is to take this opportunity as it's given to us. I would like to suggest that there's a discussion at the bottom of page 1, even in your memo, about speed and about moving quickly. And I actually think that we should take a moment to reflect on the fact that we weren't just moving quickly to move quickly, or because interest rates were accruing on unspent money, or any of the above. It was in order to meet the construction demand and the status of the CUDs. And it was also the case that we were faced with a very complex program for delivery of this important service that required time to build out, as you point out, the required staff and functionality. So it isn't that we put policy aside to move quickly. It's that we had the burden of real objectives in real time that needed to be met and consumed the board's bi-monthly meetings, which were significant. So just to make sure that the record reflects for all eternity that it wasn't that we chose speed over prudence.
Thank you, Holly. I couldn't have said that better, and I certainly didn't address that in the memo. I really appreciate you knocking that out of the ballpark. Thank you. Okay,
Yeah,
Christine.
my we met prior to this meeting, we met with VCUDA. And, our staff and VCUDA position is exactly as, I just want to let the board know that we recognize that, we're in a much different place today than we were a year and a half ago. You look at the CUDs, they have strong staffs for the most part now. And I think we are all look forward to stepping back and taking a look at our policies. So we strongly support the board in this direction.
Excellent. Okay, any other comments, statements anyone wants to make? Okay. All right, let's get at it then. Again, I'd like to leave an hour for this topic. Christine, what is our, let's just say, at,
Yeah, we actually allotted 2 hours. I'm sorry. The agenda
we
has
have
2
2
hours.
hours?
Yes.
Let's go as long as we can. Once we're exhausted, we'll say, if we can get through all 10, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
But I'd like, if we can, be thoughtful. And again, the goal of today is to start identifying policies and procedures, not to write all the policies and procedures, but identify them. And then pass them on to others to write. Thank you, Tony. So the first item on the auditor's list of risks, item 1, some CUDs face a potential construction funding gap in calendar year 2024, which could halt construction mid-stride if additional funds are not identified. And I've listed below this first item the staff's response to that item, which include various NTI Middle Mile Program, Northern Borders, other funding sources. And then below that, and this structure is applicable to all the risks that I've identified. So staff response first, and then followed by a board response. And what I've listed just as to get the ball rolling, none of this is set in stone, and we can edit everything on this piece of paper. But my first bullet item was staff determine which CUDs face funding gaps and measure the gap for each entity to determine how much is needed. So basically, I want to know more about really what the gap is, and for all the CUDs, is that applicable? How much it is? How big of a gap is it? And for specifically which CUDs have gaps? And then establish gap funds for financial coverage using grants noted by staff. So once we know the problem statement of what magnitude of dollars we're looking at, then try to figure out a gap fund to address that. So if we know the number is, I'm just making stuff up, $20 million, then we know we need to pursue some plan to address a $20 million gap, and then specifically set up a fund for the CUDs where they can apply for those gap funds. Does that make sense?
Can I just jump in, Patty?
Absolutely.
It makes sense, however, if we're qualifying the gap, it's kind of inherent in this discussion, but what kind of gap is it? Is it a materials gap? Is it a personnel gap? Is it, whatever it is, we can't afford the insurance, whatever it is, because not all of the grants, even those cited by staff, are necessarily good for all these kinds of gaps. And what I don't understand entirely is whether sometimes the gap is intended to be funded by ensuring a how do I explain this? By taking the cost out of one grant and putting it into another one so it can be funded. I think we could get very complicated here if we're not careful. Like, we have to take our grants on their face, and then we have to know what kind of gaps we have, and we have to validate that those gaps can be specifically funded by specific kinds of grants, because this federal funding is so very complicated and so specific.
Basically, the grantees need to be, they need to specify exactly what it's needed for.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
not just a blanket amount of money. It's not just that, well, the cost of fiber went up by 12%. So we need 12% more money based on our original grant. That should not cut it, in my mind.
Making notes as you're stating this.
And it's just like the list of grants that are given. I'm not convinced that all those grants could be sources for coverage of the kind of gaps that we're having, but I leave that to staff.
Okay. Let's make this a free flow conversation. So if you have a question, just jump in. I see your hands up.
So
Yeah.
Pat, we knew that there were going to be funding gaps, right? I mean, we're not able to fund any CUD's full scope, right? So part of their challenge was with the funding that was available through the VCBV and other sources, was coming up with a strategy on how to complete their funding to universal coverage, right? So do we have an inventory of from the CUDs of like what their strategies are, if there are any, and if there are not any yet, and they're still in development, just, you know, the fact that they're still in development?
I think that's a good question for Christine.
Yeah, and I think I'd love to give you Rob V an opportunity to respond to each one of these as well, to give us thoughts. But so, there's a couple things, in piggybacking what Holly said, there's a couple risks we face in terms of the BEAD funding. We can't pay back federal funds with the BEAD funding. So, and we've built these business plans. We built the business plans under the assumption that the BEAD funding would be a block grant. There's a significant amount of risk there, because the BEAD program requirements haven't been defined yet. So, so that's one thing we got to look at. The other part, that Brian's talking about is true. And I do agree with what your recommendation is, Patty, because we do know it varies by CD. Some CD have adjusted their build schedules according to the funding. Others have been, moving as fast as possible. And of course, that's the tension we face, right? With Act 71, we face that tension between universal service and getting there as quickly as possible for Vermonters, and building strong, and building those strong financial plans and that are funded through the grants. So all an important discussion, and we need to take all those into consideration. Maybe I'll give Rob an opportunity to follow on to that, Rob Vizke.
Thank you. I think that's right on, Christine, and it is complex. Each CUD has a slightly different scenario. I would just highlight kind of the spirit of what Holly said earlier. If the CUD is completing their first grant, that's actually a good thing we should celebrate. And that, what we're really trying to do is make sure construction continues apace. And so in some cases, people need materials. In some places, they have more make ready. There are a number of different scenarios for why they're running out. Some of it's because they're turning up unserved homes, and we should celebrate that. But I think, Christine has been meeting individually with Lucy in each CUD and beginning to take an inventory of this. There is a little bit of cat and mouse in this, is if we know what funding sources and what their purposes and how we could use them, the CDs may have some flexibility in where they take their existing funds as they start to ramp down. And so, this is something where there aren't 50 of these, right? We have about 6 that are in construction. And we probably really need to have a confidential conversation with each one that, again, they're working in a competitive environment. Their build plan is not something they want to discuss in the open, but there are things we can do to show what they're doing in terms of other funding sources, in terms of where they are with grant funds, in terms of where they have gaps, and to make sure that we keep a pace delivering to unserved homes.
I'd like to point out to Rob's comment that about the competitive environment. We were just advised by council that conversations leading up to grant funding are confidential. And so rather than make this a matter of competition, it's also a negotiation for grant funding. And therefore, if I understood General Counsel properly, Tony, you can feel free to correct me. You can rest assured that those conversations are confidential.
Correct.
Um,
Well said.
Patty, I'd also like to move to a related, so I don't think that Rob's disagreeing that the nature of the gap, he's not disagreeing that the nature of the gap needs to be disclosed. It's also true that knowing what funding is out there is a service that the VCBB should be providing. The third thing I'd like to mention is the accountability for gap funding appears as proposed, Patty, to be, say that fast 3 times, appears to be proposed, Patty, to be oriented towards financial accountability. And there are several policies in here that are proposed that I think are interlocking. So, I would like to know that the business plan is still viable before we invest additional funds. And I think that we need a policy around take rate reporting, truly confidential, but still is an important part of accountability. And there's other means of accountability, attendant to affordability, for example, which could be considered as part of this gap funding process. So I'm not convinced that it should be financial only in our review.
Yeah, I agree, Holly. That's a really important point.
I've added under the board's response under policy implications, reviewing business plans to assure still viable, including take rates and other financial metrics, including accountability.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, even, the viability might sound a little negative, but we want to review the business rates, from a financial responsibility standpoint. We want to look at the business plans and their take rates in terms of how that relates to the gap, right? It's definitely intertwined.
Patty, you used the words including accountability. I think what we're describing is accountability, but so I would insert the word affordability. On the other hand, that any additional grant is our opportunity to put accountability measures into the grant scenario for these CUDs that hasn't previously existed. So let's say that you're building a $20 million system and you need $5 million more. I believe, and this is a board policy that would be important to discuss or decide on as part of this overarching approach, is that it's fair and in fact prudent for the VCBB to come back and say, okay, this requirement for accountability did not attach to the first 20 million funds, but it does attach to these last $5 million. And we may even extend it into the 20 million by contract.
Yeah, and just to add to, I would rather talk about improving rather than binary things by saying accountability doesn't exist, because I think there, at the CUD level, there is an assumption of there are plans for accountability. What we want to do is improve, each one of these things. I don't want to take it a binary and say, we're totally screwed up and everything we've done is wrong kind of thing, which, that would be the wrong impression to give folks.
I don't believe anybody is suggesting that. I'm flagging a legal opportunity in this process.
Yep, understood.
Patty, or the group here, in support of this one, and maybe in number 8 as well, where there's more discussion about affordability, is a policy on general construction metrics or any project management metrics that can be put in here. I think just knowing what that is and having constant updates on what how the direction of each district is changing. Some areas are going to be higher than others. But that helps, I think that helps inform us. It keeps the public informed, and it puts the accountability and affordability on a dashboard for cost per mile, cost per unit or subscriber, take rates, having a policy around those base metrics of what I would call just good construction practices is something that I'm not sure if it goes here or number 8, but a policy around that in general would support, I think, a lot of what we're trying to accomplish and what this report highlights, not so much directly, but it's out there.
Mhm. One of the bullets, Dan, I've noted that in the policy discussion. I'm going to rework this memo with the edits from today's feedback, so we'll get that back out to everybody. But in the section under board response, I wrote, prior to receiving gap funds, in this particular item was driven by the auditor's words. In the auditors, they had some concerns in the auditor's report, and I kind of framed it into, prior to receiving gap funds, CUDs must demonstrate fiscal accountability with respect to use of past funds. VCBB staff will be instructed to create a review process to assure past funds have been appropriate. And that the driver of this was right from the auditor's report. So if somebody, I'm not insinuating this, but if somebody took dollars and they were not responsible with them and they were using them not in a wise way, we'd want to note that and we want to check that before they get more funding to make sure that we've got CUDs are using the funding appropriately.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's perfect. And I think we should add, looking forward, their forecast and their performance against their forecast. We've all learned a lot. I think all the CUDs have learned a lot about the intricacies and challenges of their territories. And so they should be adjusting their forecasts now. It was one thing a year ago, it's something today. And then their performance against those forecasts moving ahead. And that will help them and be transparent to the public about what the assumptions were and how they're doing against those. And if there's a gap, then there should be adjustments along the way, forecast adjustments, if you will, along the way, which will help inform this gap fund as well.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Dan. So I've included that as well in this list. And again, what I'd really like to do is for us to, get words on paper today. And I want Vikuda to have time to digest and respond and think it over. And Rob, I'd like to hear from you as we go, but also after the fact, I want you to look at this, what we've written down, and work with us to refine this and say, interesting idea, but maybe not attainable. And here's why. So that we're doing this in harmony with you and not asking for the moon and the sun and the stars. That, I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Do you want an update from staff on each one of these items, what we're doing presently?
Yeah, I honestly no, Christine, because I don't mean that to be dismissive. I mean that to be, we're looking at this to create future policies and programs. And it doesn't mean what's going on right now is good, bad, or indifferent. It's just that's what it is. This is future looking. So more to come on each one of these. And I don't need to dissect and identify and solve today. Just what do we need to work on for the future?
Okay.
That make sense?
Sure.
Okay. All right, anything else on risk number 1 we want to bring out today? All right, let's move on to risk number 2. CUDs may struggle to access needed construction materials. And we certainly have been talking about this for a while. And again, I've listed staff's response in those first 2 bullet items, And then under the board section, I wrote, what other items can VCBB help to pre-purchase? What is Vicuta's role and how much we can do in the future, or how much they can do in the future, and any policy implications? Do we need to develop a joint purchase policy? And I'll kick it off with that. Any thoughts? Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you. Just a comment. I think this is great. And I think that we can do here. I would love to replace or start with a procurement strategy for a policy. And the reason I want to differentiate those two is there are a number of materials that we should be concerned about. And that's going to change through time. And we need to be flexible and be aware of that. So as BEAD money starts flowing, for instance, you have to assume that the availability of fiber and some of the basic materials are going to start to decrease. We can get ahead of that. But we don't want to just purchase quickly. We want to purchase smart. We want to have a strategy to have multiple suppliers. We want to have a strategy that forces competition. And it's not just, going for a big state contract, but instead, forces competition within the marketplace to the maximum extent at any given moment as circumstances change. So I would start this one with a procurement strategy. And then if there's policy that says, here's how we measure success of that strategy, that's great.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would also add to that too. I think we should include a logistics. Part of procurement is logistics. In other words, how we store and deliver the materials as well. So, it's what's the advantage of having one single storage location and drop shipping to the construction sites versus having multiple storage locations as well.
And so
Logistics strategy.
part of the strategy would include pricing such a staging.
Yeah, exactly.
concept.
Yeah. It gets to that whole idea around collective logistics might be less expensive than individual logistics.
Along with this concept, if we do get to a point of creating a strategy and a policy and there's funding affiliated with it, I think the policy might address whether it's drawing from unallocated funds or is allocating already granted funds from the participating CUDs. So, we have put $4 million in there. I don't know whether that's been spent or not, and to whom it went, but we need to kind of do some tracking here and realize that while this might be cost effective, it doesn't create new grant funds to implement this policy.
Okay. Okay, any other thoughts at this point in time? Comments? What I'm doing is, as I'm writing these, I'm just putting a note as to basically whose words are behind each of the edits. So that's like, who said that? What do they mean by that? So we can follow up later. All right, I'm not hearing anything else on 2, so let's move to 3. Construction may be slowed by a lack of qualified construction workers. Again, this is another one we have been discussing for quite a while now. Christine has actually done quite a bit in this space. For board response, I've written down leverage skills and staffing available in Vermont. Assess what resources currently exist in the space. Talk to leaders with these resources to determine if sharing of workers is possible. Time construction with electric work to streamline and minimize expense. And policy implications, I wrote down develop a workforce development policy and coordinate with current plans.
So Patty, I have this thought about this one. You're gonna be tired of me.
Never tired.
10 risks are a lot. Any risk we could outsource would be a benefit to our initiative. So Christine has already, led the way on this issue right up to the doorsteps of Vermont Technical College, I believe. And I think that we should have as an objective to outsource this problem to the Department of Labor and the Vermont colleges system and get their commitment and buy-in rather than having to create workers ourselves. Maybe we need to continue to monitor the availability of workers because we're the ones that are most interested. But to me, this is a problem that the auditor has identified as though we're to pull rabbits out of hats. And I think we should work hard to make sure that the governor understands that we need his collective organization working on this problem.
Maybe bigger than just us.
Mhm.
Good point. Any other thoughts at this point in time?
Just a comment is in similar to what Holly was saying, is that if we park this one a bit and focus on getting our business straightened out, the market will adjust. We're not the only ones in this space, so the sooner we get ourselves coordinated and in execution mode, the sooner that all of these CUDs can secure their resources and put them under contract and move those balls forward. I'm suggesting that we focus on the higher risk areas because this one I think the market will address.
Okay. All right, any other comments at this point?
Going to get through all 10.
I think so. I'm like shocked. We're moving right along.
Thank you
Okay.
for putting the work up front.
You
Oh.
did the good job.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And it did take some time, but that's good. It's a way to move the ball forward. Risk 4, the tensions between the VCBB staff supporting the CUDs and ensuring they are viable risks, allowing any weaknesses in CUD business plan to persist and deepen.
So I just would like to comment that this issue has been in the news in the past where the auditor has felt that there wasn't full transparency in some construction related projects that have to do with community development. But the risk is real, I guess, is what my flag is. From my standpoint, I think two things might be useful going forward. And I think they've both been mentioned under our first risk. One is to develop a standard for the business plan review or for business plans generally. And I know that we've created an environment where CUDs are all unique and they're developing unique approaches, but frankly, fiber construction is a pretty standard business, and a business plan really requires particular elements, and we don't have I don't think, a publicized or stated version of what the business plan requirements are. They could be amended, they could be waived, they could be, additions could be added, but overall, we should have a standard business plan and with it the capacity to review compliance with it. And with that, I think we should be seeing, and Dan mentioned whether or not their business plan requirements are met, I think is what you said, Dan. But I think we should really be reviewing take rates and measuring them against grant spend.
Yeah. And I think we did, Holly, you're spot on. We did talk about the same item in number 1, and I think this really does dovetail to that conversation.
The one thing that we have not really looked to monitor that is inherent in monitor, I don't mean to sound like a regulator because that's not our role, But we haven't talked about retail rates. And it's, in my mind, the inherent in the business plan and in take rates, like what are your retail rates and how are they distributed? But it's very central to an affordability plan. And that's in one of the lower risks. So I'll say, keep my powder dry till we get there.
All right. Go ahead, Rob.
Happy to wait till all the board members speak, but I'll raise my hand because we have lots of interest in all of these. Again, I would just highlight here, I actually think this one was slightly overstated in the auditor's report. There are confidential conversations all the time, and they are collaborative and positive and constructive, both across the CUDs and with the VCBB staff. You don't see them as much because they're confidential. And, even on this call today, we have folks that the CUDs consider competitors. I'm sure that folks on the call think the CUDs are their competitors. It's hard to have those conversations in settings like this. But, just as an example, I had some great conversations last week with Rob and Christine about some of these topics. I had one CUD, as we were talking about the topic in general of accountability, said, hey, look, we talk about this with our governing board all the time. Staff are welcome to come to those meetings. Board members are welcome to come to those meetings. If you want to have a confidential conversation, just set it up. And so, I think guidelines are great here. Policy is great. But I would remind us that we're all mission driven here. We are not for-profit entities. We are public purpose entities trying to make sure that unserved Vermonters finally get served, and that, at the end of the grant, everyone says great job, and 20 years from now, everyone says great job. And so I think we're all aligned on that. Tensions are just, this is hard work, and it's dynamic, things change all the time. But it wouldn't be correct to say that there's anything but great collaboration trying to meet the mission.
That's well said, Rob.
I just want to insert there that we're just trying to set some objective standards that we can point to when we say, hey, we've addressed this.
Absolutely. And I think, the way Pat,
Ms. or Mr. Auditor. And the other thing about it is, I think it would be really a bad environment if CUDs couldn't come to VCBB staff and say, we've got a problem and we need to know that we can discuss that with it because we need advice. So I don't want to ruin that at all. So I'm just trying to pick out a couple of objective standards that we can track that help us know that we're doing our job while the environment morphs and does what it needs to do in order to make those things happen.
and Holly, we are so with you. Again, that protects us in our mission here, and that 3 years from now when we're closing out the grant, and 20 years from now when people look back. So there's no objections to that. I think I was just commenting that the way the risk was framed here, about some tension, I think the tension is about the hard work we have. It's not between the parties, and I just think that we should say that.
And for the auditor's benefit, we could use the phrase abundance of caution.
Yeah, which we're all interested in.
Yep.
There's no problem with that, right?
Yeah, my simple add to that, to piggyback that is, in our meetings, we've had a number of meetings with the different CUDs on their finances. They've been completely open with all the information to us, and a lot of that information, if disclosed publicly, would hurt them competitively. So I appreciate, Rob, and I pass that along to the CUDs, that I appreciate your openness and willingness. I again, as I started this conversation, I'm feeling like we're all in a good place in terms of working together moving forward. So I understand, I agree. The board responding to this is important, and that's what we're doing. Just to reiterate, that's, there's no defensiveness on our end, that's for sure.
It just is still, what is a business plan? I don't think we could hurt ourselves to state some standards.
Correct.
And And before I sent this memo around, I did toss it up to Christine to look at first. You know, it's always good form to have Christine and staff take a peek. And Christine reminded me, we do have a business plan scoring matrix. And I think that's something that, you know, put that back in front of us as a board to say, oh yeah, we got that. What is that? I don't remember it, to be honest with you, but that's something that we can use, you know, remind us what we have, and then let's look at that and leverage what from that can we improve on.
And it's a good reference, Patty, because maybe that belongs in the gap funding strategy. Or the
Very
gap
true.
statement.
Yep, very true. Okay, anything else here on risk 4 for right now? Again, we can always come back to these at any time and add and massage this. Right, let's move on to item 5. Risk 5, reliance upon CUDs with varying levels of expertise and capacity may delay broadband service to some Vermonters, lead to increased spending, and establish inequitable policies and access. And again, I've listed staff's response, there were several responses. And what I did was pull some comments here for what I thought would be some board discussion. And I'll let you read these.
Some of these comments that you've made, Patty, would be addressed in some of the other things we've talked about doing.
Agreed.
I think it's really presented in such a complex way. So the affordability definition and the CUD oversight and accountability policy are important, and then it's a matter of how and when to apply them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all of a piece, right? And there really is very little other than applying the ACP to rates that is an objective requirement, and I believe that's in the agreements. There, however, is a whole program, and you know, I have a special reason for knowing this. There is a whole program of how to address the public and how to be inclusive in outreach that goes to affordability and making opportunities available to low-income households. And that is not just about the ACP. That is a very complex and dynamic environment that talks about even how billing is done. So there's opportunities for CUDs to be more proactive from the get-go. And we can use this framework as we talk about what affordability is and how to create an affordability policy, which is part of our accountability policy.
Mm-hmm. Hollywood, in the affordability definition, I mean, I could see within that affordability definition that we're more prescriptive of what that means.
Absolutely. And you know, I'm right here and now, I'm going to enlist our general counsel to, you know, Laura is in the last throes of the budget in the legislature. And so now this meeting was not the time, but Laura and I are committed to doing a memo to the board about affordability and accountability. And we'll rely on Tony to help us square up how affordability is addressed in all the various grant environments at the federal level, because it's not just a single simple thing. But this is an area where we have to decide, you know, the auditor suggests that is using the word inequitable in a very loose way. And it's a word that it is like a chameleon. You can get inequities in so many different ways. The fact is that CUDs just like ISPs generally, will have different rates to serve different systems. And whether or not they're affordable has to be relatively true based on that system, because there is not going to be probably a one size fits all price. It's not like there's going to be the CUD price for service in the state of Vermont. And yet what is affordable needs to be addressed.
And on that topic, does our job as the VCBB board push us to define affordability? But it is the CUD's responsibility to define how they respond to that definition.
Exactly.
Like I see it as it's their charge and it's their process to figure out how to accommodate, not accommodate, it's the wrong word, how they work around affordability. But we have to define it, and it's their job to carry out that definition. And I don't want to get into their job of how they carry it out, but I think we need to definitely define it.
And be prepared to put grant language in each grant that helps us with accountability, including affordability.
Some boundaries around that, yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm on the same page with that for sure. But I want to step into their shoes, but we need to give enough specificity that they understand what it is so they can at least address it.
Exactly. I mean, just to be bold, is it merely putting the link to the ACP portal on their website? You know, there's a number of ideas here that could be synthesized, but that's for food for another day.
Right.
Or thought or something.
Okay, anything else on risk number 5? I think there's quite a bit in this document to chew on that particular topic.
So
Okay,
let me
go
ask a question. When you talk about an affordability policy, is that something you're looking for staff to come up with a proposal, or is that going to be something the board is going to develop?
So how I understood, I understand that staff has a whole affordability initiative that's brought on by the new federal funding and a digital equity initiative that's bigger than the affordability initiative. And I'm just thinking that for funding purposes immediately, we're going to just consider that under accountability. And then I fully expect that staff is going to have a lot to say about how that gets implemented, what the requirements of federal funding are, and all sorts of things like that. But we need some toehold bigger than we've got in our current grants, I think.
Yeah, and so with that, I would, when Vernonburg presents later, I'm going to signal Vernonburg, to talk about, yeah, that is a requirement as far as the BEAD 5-year plan to come up with an affordability policy. So maybe Vernonburg, can you address it briefly into how you intend, to look at that as a.
And I'm looking
country.
for how it will apply to grants made in the second half of 2023.
Yeah, I think we're going to be able to meet that schedule. No problem. I mean, I think that you'll see that schedule fits.
Holly,
there was, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Holly, you said that you and Laura were actually tackling the accountability and affordability definition draft. Is that true?
Well, you had assigned us accountability, and we thought that affordability would probably be a piece of that. But it's just a draft. The one thing I would say is that I know Patty disagrees with me on this, but I am very concerned with a repeated reference to a $50 million grant intake equaling a potential $10 per month service charge. I don't find anywhere any substantive support for that. And I don't think there's a correlation that is that readily available. So I would not like to see the VCBB adopt any paperwork that makes reference to that statement. It's just not anything the board has considered or a proof point that's been made.
Are you saying,
For context,
that
yeah, hold on, Christine, for context, I'll state, I interpret that statement as a rule of thumb versus a hard and fast data point.
yeah, thank you. And by the way, I can defend the math on that if the board would like to see that, but it's a general statement. It really keep us focused. Right now, we're trying to focus on getting as much grant funding as possible. We've been able to show the correlation between the amount of grant funds and the average revenue required per unit. I can stand behind that math, but I think it's not about creating a policy. It's about why we need, as a staff and a board, to continue to focus on getting as much grant funding as possible, which is what our current strategy is. But if the board tells me, look, back off from that strategy, we will certainly do that.
So I don't see it as a strategy, and maybe it's my sensitivity to representations by the VCBB, but I see it as it's too often sounds like a statement of fact. And I just think it would be fine to say the more grant money we have, the lower the potential rates to consumers. It's enough. So that's just my comment on that. I want to make it publicly. And the fact of the prices for materials going up and the number of personnel available to do the work is low. We don't really know, I don't think, how much grant money we could consume in the construction of this statewide network. So how to guess what the ultimate impact is on the rates might be a bit premature, but all in all, I hear you that it's a soundbite intended to be supportive of additional grant funds, and I just wish we would characterize it slightly differently without numbers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything else on item 5? Risk 5.
Patty, I think I meant number 5 when I was speaking earlier. I misspoke when I said 8, but it is in both of those. I don't want to say alternatives analysis, but that's what I have in mind sometimes when I think about our goal to provide broadband services to ensure that as many households in the state of Vermont have broadband. That really is the goal. And there are areas where it just doesn't make sense for a CUD perhaps to go there, and maybe a partnership would get the consumer the connectivity that's necessary. And I think included in this oversight and accountability policy could be language to support partnerships that would achieve the outcome that we want, which is broadband connectivity at an affordable rate. That not always is building it ourselves as a community network the most cost-effective solution. And so including that language in the policy, I think, would be valuable. Something to that effect.
So an alternative where it could be built cheaper by somebody else?
Yeah, like, keep in mind what the goal is.
And Dan, when you're thinking about that, would you include non-fiber solutions such as wireless?
I would prefer not to, but only for as an interim solution, so we can go fast to the market and get houses connected as an interim solution, but a long-term goal of having fiber to every home.
Okay.
Every underserved home, let me say it that way. But I don't see the wireless as being a long-term viable solution. Starlink is great, but it really has a ceiling to it, and it's not limitless.
And mobile service is better than no service, but ultimately it isn't the final service, or it's not equal service for other households.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I'm sure you know I had to respond to that one. I actually agree with 95% of what you said. I would say the devil's in the details on this in terms of how we approach those, the line extension approach instead of building community-based broadband. And, I think this is a place where the CUDs actually have done a lot of work to consider this. And I know that, again, without going into any details here, there are conversations about what the right blend is in various places across the state. And so I think that's right on. I think one place that would be helpful is to get some articulation in the policy that develops here of some of the other goals in Act 71. And in particular, in the preamble, there's one of the harshest criticisms of our history as a state in terms of protecting the public interest. That says, we've made investments before and they've failed when we've, gone purely private. And so I think, there's a question here about how, not what. I think you're right. There's some efficiency that that we should be looking at every time for alternatives. Again, with that goal of getting fiber in front of those homes, but how do we make sure that fiber delivers not just during the grant performance term, but for the next 20 years or beyond? And so, I think the CUDs have some innovative ideas there. We're looking forward to this conversation. And I think, we all can do a great service to the state by being really careful about thinking about if we do that, how do we set those contracts up in such a way that they protect the public interest long into the future?
Well said.
Okay. All right, that's good. I've listed that, Rob. Okay. Any other things for item 5, risk 5? All right, let's move to risk 6. With the exception of the early VCBB staff fiber purchase, CUDs have not been partnering for procurement of goods and services, risking higher cost and inferior outcomes. And essentially, this is a shared services suggestion where it makes sense. I'm not sure I agree with everything in the auditor's report on this, but I think some things certainly could benefit from a shared services policy, but I don't know that everything can be purchased that way. And just that's my mindset on this. Let's open this one up. Rob, happy to have you chime in on this because it kind of is like a VCUDA. It's going, hey, can VCUDA help us with the shared services?
I think you already framed it. There is a ton of communication and collaboration about contracts and procurements that happens between the CUDs and often with the VCBB. Christine's picture there is the prime example that we all talk about, was the most formal of those. But I can tell you that in the place where I came from, I was responsible for the profit and loss of a broadband company, and the contracts were where my bread and butter was. When I came in here, I'd poke all the time at the CUDs about how they negotiated various parts of their supply chain, and I'm actually always impressed. There are strategies, there is collaboration, there is work all the time. We were talking about some of the electronics recently. I was talking to Krista about that, and she walked through the steps she took in that procurement to drive down the cost and to share the results with the other CUDs. So those things happen. I think this is another example where there actually is some very positive behavior and practice that we could turn into strategy and policy. And we could probably do more of it. It isn't clear to me that doing massive procurements and trying to get the best deal for the next 5 years is as effective as a really great person who does this all the time, doing spot procurements for some of the smaller items. So, again, strategy is important here. We should talk to the people who do this every day and make sure that we are taking the best of those practices and incorporating them into policy, and not creating monolithic large procurements, which typically mean they're really easy to buy off of, but they're higher cost.
Yeah, but so you talk about materials, but talk about also the shared services component of this as well, Rob.
Yeah, so again, we're through the Northern Borders Grant, we're making some progress on this. There are, we're up to, I think, 4 working groups within VCUDA, and then there are all these bilateral conversations that happen around various areas of affinity between the CUDs. The Northern Borders Grant is going to help us add, I call them flywheels, to those conversations. Flywheel keeps momentum in a system. And so, to have the kind of associate program coordinator role, someone who's taking notes and forwarding on and, moving through, making sure that the conversations that already happened are documented and spread widely is a win. And something we can expand our investment in. It's happening now, but we can do better at it. We're working on shared services in the financial space. We're talking about, there's some things you can't do together by nature of having separate organizations, but there's a lot of collaboration around tools, systems, process, reporting, et cetera, that the CUDs are talking about. That'll be a great investment. Procurement, having someone who's not doing the purchases in a centralized way necessarily, but who's checking to make sure that everyone's got the best deal, letting people know trends that are going on in the industry, et cetera. Again, a place for shared services. So I think there are lots of these opportunities. And this is a place where, we can formalize kind of the informal behaviors that have developed, which are very positive, and resource them, and we can do better. So, we took the auditor's comments on this one, not as anything's wrong, but as, hey, look, any good system should focus some attention here, and we agree with that.
So I have a question for Rob. Notwithstanding the stellar negotiation tactics of Krista Shute, creating an environment where the CUD organizations have to become procurement experts seems daunting to me. And I'm wondering what role the operator organizations that are in the business can, play in helping on a procurement level. I mean, aggregating collectively among CUDs is one way to approach it. Aggregating collectively with operators is another. Is that being done?
Absolutely. And so this is a place where the CUDs that are in construction have several different models, but they do tend to line up with whether they're working with WCVT, or whether they're working with GWI. And absolutely, those organizations play a role in their other non-CUD business, bringing experience to the way procurements and efficiency happens. And so, yeah, this is another reason why it wouldn't necessarily make sense to centralize procurement if, for instance, in the GWI space, we're already leveraging the larger mass they have to buy with their properties in Maine and elsewhere, right? Or with Waitsfield, with the other services, service territories they have that are not part of a CUD. So those kinds of things I actually think are optimized. What we can do is we can cross-check them more.
Yep.
And make sure that they're optimized and point out where we find additional opportunities. But, again, there are only 6 CUDs that are in construction. There are only there are 2 major partners across those 6. So, this is not like we're trying to set up procurement across 100 entities. It's reasonable and manageable. And the partners do play absolutely a key role in additional knowledge and strategy around what we should be paying for this widget or that widget.
Okay, that's very helpful. All right, anything else on item 6?
Yeah, I guess I'll make one more point that we're hearing, at the national meetings. And the recent work, if we're looking at what happened, last year, the lead times were long. This year, the lead times have compressed. And so, trying to understand what's going to happen move forward when this 42.5 billion hits the hits the economy is something, you know, we need to consider and have maybe some contingency plans for. We've been warned about this at the federal level, that when this money hits the economy, our lead times are likely to expand again. So, you know, I think that needs to be part of the consideration. And we're also, you know, been sharing, we asked for feedback from the congressional delegation on the Buy America provision and the impact that has. And, you know, that's something we want, you know, we've stated that we think, you know, that's a good goal, but we do want to look for, and that may be part of our policy to say, when do we, you know, when does the VCBB believe it's, you know, appropriate to get a waiver from that policy?
Okay. Okay, anything else on item 6 or 6?
Patty, I'm just alerting you that I'm waning. This,
Sorry,
this is a
sorry.
lot, even for me.
Yeah, I know it's a lot. I'm gonna push us a little bit because I think item 7 is pretty quick.
Yeah.
Let's
And
move on.
Dan's in for the whole 9 yards.
All right, let's move. So let's go to my item 7, confidentiality provision. I think we've talked about this. I think we need a confidentiality policy, leaning in towards transparency, as we stated earlier, before we went into executive session to talk about legal. But I'm going to put this on Tony's plate to give us a confidentiality policy. Just these words in here. We all set for that? All right, let's go to 8. Lack of affordability. I think we've talked about this one as well. Laura and Holly are going to tackle this.
With staff.
With staff, yep.
Yeah, I
You've already-
think that, and I would add to with, you know, we'll do this collectively with the CUDs as well. But I
Exactly.
certainly look forward to that discussion.
Yeah, and I want to say all of these 10 items need to be vetted through VCUDA and the CUDs. This is not meant to be in a silo. We want to be completely open. So I want to put something forward for you to react to, and this is not hard and fast. These are general concepts, and we want your feedback. Okay, item
And
9.
on
Go
the
ahead.
record, before we leave 8, I'm going to object again to wording that says every 50 million in grants results in a $10 million reduction in service costs. Thank you.
That down. Objects to language. Reduces. And I see that as a rule of thumb, not a hard and fast. But that's what it is. Item 9. Affirm the VCBB staff. This is a conflict of interest issue. I think we should establish a conflict of interest policy. I don't see that the CTC issue was a problem. And I think staff's response to that was appropriate. Any comments?
And it's history.
Yeah, agreed. But I do think we should have a conflict of interest policy. Let's move to the last one, just 10. The BEAD's irrevocable letter of credit requirement is not designed for small and new telecommunication entities. And I think we all agree to that. Staff has a good response here. And looking at my notes. What policy implications here? Anything else we want to add to this?
I don't see this. This is like a fact of life problem. And overall, I'll be so bold as to say, unfortunately, the federal standards are generally skewed for large existing operators.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are in little Vermont in very rural environments trying to leverage that money that promises us a better future, yet dealing with programs and standards catered to large existing ISPs. So I wonder whether there is anything that our congressional delegation could do for us in addressing this issue with the regulators or the grantors.
Yeah, we've been meeting with the congressional delegation. Although I think, it's good for it's good for us to do some detail on this. I appreciate Patty and the board's response, because I think an informed board position would be helpful as well.
So you're looking for a policy on this, Christine? Or just a statement?
Just a statement. I think, you said policy implications. You asked for two things: staff response to you encourage, but the policy implications, we can define that better.
Okay.
And then
I'm just
have
gonna
the
put a
board-
board, I'm gonna
yeah.
put a board statement around this issue. And Tony, if you can help us mass some words for it, that would be helpful.
My best. I'll do my
Okay.
best.
Thank
It
you.
would be great to be able to show in context how this works in some environments and not in ours.
Rob, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I want to comment that I actually think the statement to the feds is really important here, and it's worth the board being on record about how this affects a state like Vermont and the programs like what we're doing here. I also want to compliment Rob and Christine for some work they've been doing in the background on this issue. And in particular, as part of the middle mile grant application process, this requirement has already come up, and there's been some very creative work, very collaborative across state government to think about how the state as an entity is established in the municipalities, or in the case of middle mile, VCBB, is a part of the state that has good credit. And
Yeah,
so
let me interrupt too, because I want to make sure we don't get into the details of that, because
Yeah.
we're not done with
I'm
these
not going to,
negotiations.
Christine,
Yeah,
I'm not
okay.
going to, but I would just
Okay,
say
thank you.
for the record here that this is an issue, and that there's been some great work in the background, and it would be worth executive session to talk about it.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. All right. We have plowed through 10 risks, which I am just shocked by, which is great. Well done, all. I have added an additional policy was not addressed in the auditor's report that I think we still need to come up with. So I'm just going to put it on the list, which is a customer service standards policy. That's just an additional policy to throw in there to work on. Doesn't need to be done tomorrow. Just it's on our list of to-dos.
Are you envisioning that as part of the accountability piece?
Well, that's a great question, Holly. You could roll that up into accountability. Yeah,
Not that I want to draft it. Don't
Yeah.
get me wrong.
I'm happy to have you take a hit
Yeah.
at it.
Well, it is also required of ISPs that they have a customer service statement or contract that's publicly available on their websites and so on and so forth. So we might want to find out what's there first, and leverage that as opposed to inventing something out of whole cloth.
Absolutely agree. Rob,
Although,
if you have any insights on that as well to feed us, that would be fantastic.
can you tell us more, Patty, about what you're thinking of when you say that?
So
Customer service?
as part of the grants we gave out, one of the concerns was with a for-profit entity consolidated, and we required certain standards as part of that grant. I think we need a policy frame that so it's applicable to everybody, not just consolidated where they're the ISP. Should be applicable to the universe of CUDs we're working with. It is an accountability piece.
Yeah. We could come up with the, checklist of the 10 things it should include or something like that. But anyway.
Exactly. Again, yeah, exactly. All right, this has been fabulous. Thank you all. I'm really excited that we got through all 10. And again, I expect this to be a fluid process. We can always come back to anything that anybody wants to revisit. And what I'd like to do is, prioritize the list of what we're going to accomplish first. And maybe Tony and I and Christine meet and have a discussion of what do we want to tackle first. And again, I envision this to be a back and forth where Tony talks to Rob and the CUDs and say, here's a draft. What do you guys think? You know, we massage it around, and this is a process that will unfold over time. It's not going to be done tomorrow. It's a time-based thing into the future.
Sense.
Agreed. Glad to support it.
Excellent.
And
Thank
can we
you.
take a 5-minute break before we get to our next item?
Yeah, happy to. Yep. 1:53, we'll be back at 1:58.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's come back together and move along. Next up on the agenda is item 5B, digital equity. Vernon Bird introduction and overview. Christine, you want to tee us up?
Yes. As part of the BEAD and digital equity grant that we were provided to do a 5-year plan, we're on a timeline to provide a 5-year plan to the NTIA. And that's a requirement in order to release the funds to the state. And as part of that, we did an RFP. We reached out. We were very pleased to see we had 12 responses, most of which were very good. We put a team together which included a representative from the Public Service Department, as well as a representative from our core advisory team, which the core advisory team consists of different agencies and organizations in the state focused on equity. That we narrowed that down to, we put together a decision matrix, which we can provide and make public as well. And then narrowed that down to 4, and then we interviewed 4, and Vernon Bird came out as number 1. And we did a kickoff last week, Monday and Tuesday, all day with staff to really develop the timeline and plan. And I will turn it over to Paul Garnett to take it from here to introduce his team and provide the board with what we talked about on Monday and Tuesday. As I said, we committed to the board, we will present monthly the status on that as part of the ongoing part of the agenda until we complete that plan. And of course, the board will have an opportunity to review that plan before it gets submitted.
All right,
Paul,
great. Yeah, thank you, Christine. Thanks for the introduction. And we're excited and honored to have been selected by the VCBB to do this work. And I actually didn't know there were so many responses. So I'm also surprised and honored and excited to be involved in this work. And so yeah, we were in Montpelier last week, kicking it off with Christine and her team. And we're full speed ahead, sleeves rolled up and getting to work on getting this all rolling. So I understand we have 15 minutes on the agenda in total, and we have a few slides we'd like to go through with you all, if that's okay. I don't know, Breeze, do you want to project them and drive them if you don't mind? I can do it as well, but all right. So so just very briefly, if you want to go to the next slide, Breeze. So the idea here is do a bit of introduction to Vernon Group, have a discussion about process and timeline, and then discuss what our next steps are on the project. So just to begin by introducing our firm. So we are a consulting firm that is 100% focused on the digital divide, and we work with companies, governments, nonprofits, and other types of organizations that, like us, have a vested interest in seeing billions more people around the world, not just in the U.S., and things connected to the internet. I started Vernon Group 2.5 years ago. So we're a youngish consulting firm, but I've been in the telecom, media, and telecommunication technology space for about 30 years. And my most recent job before I started my consulting firm was working for Microsoft for 12 years, where among other things I created something called the Airband Initiative, which is Microsoft's strategic initiative on digital divide. And while I was at Microsoft, I decided I wanted to dedicate the rest of my career to solving this intractable problem. So we advise clients on various aspects of what it'll take to bring affordable high-speed connectivity to unserved and underserved populations, both in the U.S. and in emerging markets. Our work is about 50% in the U.S. and 50% in places like Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia and a bit in Latin America. And our work in the U.S. is across the country. It so happens we're not doing any work in Vermont, which made it easy for us to respond to the RFP and not have to worry about any kinds of conflicts of interest. The work we do really falls into two categories, roughly. So broadband policy is one major area that we get involved in, and we have been definitely following what's been happening in Washington, D.C. on broadband policy, including the infrastructure bill and all the other various waves of funding that have been coming the state's way, and have written quite extensively on the topic over the last couple of years, which kind of sets the stage nicely for us to be able to support efforts like the one you have underway in Vermont. We also so happen to work a lot with small network operators, both in the U.S. and abroad. So, like in Vermont, where you have CUDs as well as other small network operators who are focusing on rural, unserved and underserved communities. We happen to have a lot of experience working with those kinds of companies. And we also work a lot with kind of new tech, small companies with new solutions around connectivity. And so, so that's the work we're doing. And we started to respond to some of these RFPs a couple months ago, and we're pleased to be selected by Vermont and excited to give it 100% of our effort. If you want to go to the next slide, Breeze. So to introduce the core team, a few people are on this call. Another thing that sort of made Vermont make sense for us is that we actually have a couple people on our team who are based in Burlington. Both are UVM MBA grads, and one is a double UVM degree, so undergrad and grad. And then I just personally have a lot of kind of lifelong connections to Vermont. My father happens to live up in Irisburg, Vermont, which is an unserved part of Vermont, and he'd love to have good, fixed, affordable broadband connectivity where he lives. Right now, he basically uses a mobile connection for his broadband connectivity up there. And then I've got various other relatives throughout the state. So I have just a personal connection to the state. But in terms of the core team, Breeze, do you want to just get off mute and just quickly introduce yourself, and then Alex can do the same.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Breeze McElvain. I will be the project manager for our support to VCBB in the state of Vermont. I am Verneberg's Director of Digital Equity and come from a background of about 13, 14 years in the mostly nonprofit sector of technology for social impact, including a few years at Microsoft's Airband initiative focused on digital and racial equity specifically. I'm delighted to get to know all of you and support Vermont in this effort. Thank you.
Alex?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex, and I am going to be playing the role of stakeholder engagement manager on this project, along with my colleague, Caroline Hauser, who has not joined the call yet, but I think is planning to.
Now.
Oh, as I live and breathe, Miss Caroline is right there. So I'll turn it over to her in a moment or two. But in terms of my background, I've focused historically on public affairs and communicating and advocating around technology and telecommunications issues. So I worked at a DC-based firm focused on that. And then I'm just coming off 2 years working for the federal government on emerging technology issues and the production of regulatory policies and guidance. Really excited to be here, really excited to get to know Vermont intimately over the next few months. I'm going to be at if there's a major event happening in Vermont, I will be there with bells on talking about broadband. So I'm looking forward to really getting a sense of the state through my interactions with the public. And I will turn it over to Caroline to introduce herself.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and apologies I was late. I had the timing off on my calendar. But great to meet you all. Thanks so much for having us here. My name's Caroline Hauser. I'm one of our team members who's based in Burlington. I've lived here for about 7 years, with a short stint in New York in between. So my background is a combination of sustainability, finance, and operations. So yeah, as Alex mentioned, I'll be focusing more on the stakeholder engagement piece of this, and being in Burlington helps a lot with that.
So one other person who cannot join today is Jess Monago. He's also based in Burlington. He's actually walking along the Inca Trail this week in Peru on vacation with his partner. So he could not join us today. Thankfully, he's actually taking a break. He has a corporate finance background, and he's going to be helping us with a lot of the numbers related activities, like making sure that all the dollars that are going to become available from the feds are maximized for the greatest impact. And then we also have a group of about half a dozen other Vernonburg Group consultants who will be brought in on various different aspects of it, from mapping to the technical aspects of the work. And then we have 3 subcontractors that we partnered up with. One is focused on PR and support, further supporting the outreach piece. Another firm specializes in disability access. We felt that was a very important aspect of this work to make sure that every form of outreach, every document we produce is and every opportunity for input from the public maximizes opportunities for persons with disabilities and other groups to be able to share their input and participate in this process. So we hired a consulting firm that does specialize in that space to help guide us there. And then thirdly, we hired a local Vermont firm called Community Roots, which specializes in community outreach, stakeholder engagement in the state, because we felt that we needed some additional local knowledge to help to supplement what we know about things like broadband. So that is the core team. And I think we can go to the next slide if nobody has any comments. Okay, over to you, Breeze.
Thank you, Paul. We wanted to give a quick overview of the plans that we'll be working with VCBB to develop over the coming months, and the approximate timing and what their purpose are, so you have a sense of the process and what's coming up. The first will be the BEAD, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment 5-year action plan. That's due at the end of August to NTIA, and the focus of that will be making sure that Vermont is able to maximize the use of the federal funding for broadband access and get as many people in Vermont access to fiber as possible. And then related to that is the initial proposal for BEAD, and that is Vermont's proposal for how it will administer those grant funds to sub-grantees and internet providers and others who will be actually deploying the work and the infrastructure. Those 2 pieces are linked. The first part, called Volume 1, will go in conjunction with the 5-year action plan, and that will entail the challenge process for unserved and underserved locations in Vermont's grant administration program. That will be a key part of the first step there. And then the rest of the initial proposal will be, we're targeting the end of September for that submission. And once the 5-year action plan and the full initial proposal are approved by NTIA, that unlocks 20% of the funding for Vermont to be able to start using some of that funding. So we'll be working closely with VCBB as well as with broader, a deep and diverse range of stakeholders to ensure that these plans reflect the needs and priorities of the state, community-driven solutions, and are able to get the most out of the funding to increase access. And then leading to that, to broader digital equity initiatives. With that plan, we're targeting December for the submission of that, and that will align very closely with the BEAD plan, but will entail broader adoption, digital skilling, access to affordable devices, and some of those other kinds of related initiatives. And so all of this together will establish the vision and strategy for Vermont to achieve digital equity, including broadband access and adoption, and how the federal funding can be used most effectively. We hope to realize that vision in Vermont. So there will be an extensive stakeholder engagement process. We welcome input and feedback throughout this process and are here really to support VCBB to make sure that these documents are powerful and reflect your vision as effectively as possible.
Breeze and Paul, I just wanted to call out that I saw Holly has put her hand up a couple of times, so I wanted to just confirm
sorry.
that there's not a question there.
Thanks, Alex. I can't see much while presenting. Thank you.
Holly, do you have a question?
Alex makes it clear that he really is for stakeholder engagement, starting with hands up in the Zoom. So thank you. This is such an exciting step for us, and I'm just full of questions that it might be standardized terminology used in the legislation or for you in your everyday work, but I'm interested in really two things. Will you educate the board on what your definitions of equity and diversity are? Will you even explain to us what stakeholder engagement really means? How deep, how wide? And what will be your process for working with staff to get documents and plans in front of the board for review prior to their deployment? Thanks.
Excellent question.
Yeah, maybe I could start. Alex, maybe take part 2 and 3. Or maybe Alex takes part 2 and Breeze takes part 3. Let's see what happens. But I think I would first of all just say on all 3, this is an iterative process, and this involves obviously leadership from the VCBB. So we're not here with sort of a religiosity about a specific target. We're here to support you. The infrastructure bill, specifically the Digital Equity Act, identifies 8 covered populations that every state and territory is required to get to account for, get feedback from, incorporate in their digital equity planning. And those include folks located in rural areas, low income communities, ethnic minorities, English as a second language learners, currently or formerly incarcerated populations, and a few others that I'm not thinking off the top of my head. And then in the NTIA, the office in the U.S. Department of Commerce that has overall responsibility for overseeing all of this, in their notices of funding opportunity, they also included some other groups that they want to make sure are being heard, including the LGBTQ plus community, tribal communities, and organized labor as groups. But then also the notices of funding opportunity, as well as the statute, also allow states to add their own local flavor. So if there are particular groups who have traditionally been disenfranchised from a digital equity perspective, those can also be accounted for in those plans. The other thing I will say is, we've written a lot on the issue of digital equity over the last couple of years. We as a firm and as a group of consultants, we love to be data driven. And one of the things that we see in the data, especially involving things like digital equity, adoption of broadband, and utilization of digital services, is that a lot of times these adoption gaps are all the way down to the individual. So you can generalize, but one of the hardest things about the adoption challenge is that it is complicated and complex, and even within specific identified groups, you'll see variability and availability and adoption of technology. So any digital equity plan should really be driven by the data, go local, as local as you possibly can. Obviously, consider all of those covered populations, but also we think really need to go down to the individual, and that's a good segue into the community outreach and stakeholder engagement question, and part of the reason why we hired a local firm to be a part of our consortium, because we just felt it was extremely important to double click on that. So Alex, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at you naturally segueing, Paul. That was excellent. Yeah, so as far as stakeholder engagement is going to look, this, we've heard from the legislation on through even to our meeting with the NTIA federal program officer for Vermont last week, that these plans, stakeholder engagement is going to drive the production of a lot of the content of these plans, and are really kind of a linchpin and cornerstone of this whole BEAD and digital equity grant deployment process. And so we want to reflect that in our stakeholder engagement approach. So we've a lot of our discussion in the kickoff meeting last week really did focus on stakeholder engagement and how to most effectively engage with different segments of Vermont's population, and while also respecting the fact that folks are being asked to do a lot of stakeholder engagement right now, particularly from the covered populations that we're really trying to reach. So we want to balance between respecting the time and not overburdening folks with engagement opportunities and requests, while also getting the perspective and the information that will really drive these plans to be the most successful for Vermont. So our approach is several fold, I'll say. I don't know how many folds it is. I can't count that high, but basically we will have several different types of engagement that we're going to be doing throughout this process. So first, we plan for what we call heavy touch events, which are events that are branded as State of Vermont Community Broadband Board. We are organizing them, championing them, and running the show there. Those will be in-person events that we plan to hold throughout the state of Vermont. We're currently consulting with the VCBB and staff to determine what locations will be best for those in-person public engagement events. And our plan is to focus those to the extent practicable and possible on the areas that have the largest number of and underserved individuals. So that's kind of our guiding force and where we're going to hold those, but we're still working through that with the VCBB at this point. So that is kind of one segment of feedback. Those will be public listening sessions first and foremost. There'll be a short presentation at the beginning of those meetings where we'll discuss, where a member of the VCBB will discuss what we're doing here, what opportunity is presented to the VCBB and to the state of Vermont in terms of the funding, and what are the questions that we have and what are the problems that we're really trying to solve here. And then we'll open the floor for kind of intensive, facilitated, but open mic style dialogue from community members so we can hear what their perspective and their lived experience has been in internet access and adoption in Vermont. So in conjunction with those events, we'll also be doing what we call light touch events. And those are events that are already taking place in the community where folks from Vermont are already going to be, that we will set up a table at, or we'll deploy some of our resources to meet people where they're already going and to collect responses there. So, and public comments there. So those will be things like we're planning to go to Thunder Road We're also planning to go to various farmers markets throughout the state. County fairs are another one that was suggested. We were also thinking so that we could specifically reach some of the lower income and unhoused folks about doing going to food bank open hours for the community and meeting folks there and just asking them, you know, what their experience has been in a more kind of truncated setting, but where we'll still be able to get the information that will inform our plans and get an understanding of their lived experience. We will also be, so supplementing that will be our coordination with outreach activities that are already ongoing. So specifically, NECA, the Northeast Kingdom Community Action, has received a grant to conduct ACP outreach throughout Vermont, and they're planning to conduct a household survey. We're planning to coordinate with them so that we can include questions that we would like answered and the type of public and the information that we need in their survey requests, so that when they're already communicating with folks about this issue, we will be able to glean some information that will be useful to us as well. Once the Public Service Department has selected their consultant for the 10-year telecommunications plan that Vermont is going to refresh, we'll also plan to coordinate with them. And then lastly, we're going to have, you know, open opportunities for feedback if word spreads by word of mouth that this process is ongoing. We just were having a conversation earlier about setting up an email inbox at the VCBB, things like that, so that folks, when they hear that this process is going on, can say, oh, I have thoughts. I want to submit a comment at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night, and we'll be able to receive that in conjunction with all these other events that we have going on. And then lastly, we will be kind of hopefully doing some more active social media around this and postings and trying to get to folks online through Facebook and Twitter and those types of sites. We also plan to monitor those posts in case folks leave feedback in the comments, so that we can leverage comments that folks are already going to make and incorporate those into our plans as well. I know that was a lot. I'm happy to go into any more detail about stakeholder engagement that folks are interested in. Otherwise, I will turn it over to Breeze to answer that last question.
A couple, just three quick things to add to that. One, there will be a public comment period that's required by the BEAD and Digital Equity NOFO. So once we have a draft done of each of those plans, and the draft has been approved by the CBB, we'll put it out for a public comment period. The other thing that we are planning to do, especially for example, for the immunocompromised, who will not want to show up at a public event, is have you know, a webinar conference call, kind of an opportunity for people to dial in and learn more about what we're doing and provide feedback. And then lastly, similarly, we're going to have a similar kind of a venue focused on the CUDs and the other broadband providers and other technology companies in the state to get their feedback as well. So over to Breeze.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. And a key point where we've planned to send the documents to the VCBB board for review and input is just before that public comment period, so that the draft that goes out for public comment incorporates not only VCBB's input, but the board's, and is in good shape in all of your view and perspective there. So each of these plans will have that draft review with you all before they go out for public comment.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add is, because we're moving so quickly, is we really want to chunk this out so that you're not getting everything at one time. So just as we're going to be having conversations with VCBB staff on different aspects of this and getting their feedback and okay on different sections of these plans, we also would like to be able to do the same thing with you over time. So it's not necessarily going to be a case that we're going to present everything all at once, but rather bring up topics that where we're looking for some feedback.
If I could just interject here, I'm so grateful that you're focused on real Vermont and engaging really in Vermont. I alert you to the work of John Horgan at the Benton Institute, who recently reported that only 5% of eligible low-income Vermonters are receiving ACP benefits. And generally, his work suggests that rural communities don't coordinate on broadband initiatives the way urban communities do, regardless of race. So that's a question that I'm hoping the VCBB will work on. Thank you.
Thanks.
And this is Patty jumping in. The transparency and collaboration are really important for all the documents that you're completing for us to make sure that VCUDA has a chance to review it and the CUDs as well, because we value their input as the VCBB board. And I just wanted to chime in and put a plug in for them as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and what good news is we met with Ellie DeVeers from Maple Broadband, DeVillers from Maple Broadband last week. She's someone I've known for many years. Actually, I met her in South Africa originally, and she was kind enough to make introductions to all of her counterparts at the other CUDs, and so we're going to be definitely not waiting till there's. Again, not waiting till we're done to talk to them, but actually talking to them as soon as possible to get their input.
Right.
Yeah, and Ally, by the way, is the chair of VCUDA, so that's why it was appropriate for her to be included.
Yeah.
So in terms of immediate next steps, we're working on finalizing the project plan and timeline with VCBB. Next, we'll be finalizing some plans for policy and program reviews of what's existing in Vermont, as well as the stakeholder engagement plan, so that we can hit the ground running with those soon, and beginning our desk research in conjunction with stakeholder input. And then also, as Paul mentioned, aligning with you all on your perspectives of those key components of these plans, such as defining your vision for digital equity, what measurable objectives will be, how you plan to administer grants, criteria for selection, things like that. So there's a lot that will begin shortly, and these are kind of the top initial steps we'll be working on.
Just one thing I wanted to add on stakeholder engagement is that I think this would be a really great opportunity, and we would like to encourage you all as members of the board to attend public engagement events when you're available or when they're kind of geographically convenient for you. We will work with you on what kind of role you want to play in those events, if any, other than just an observer. But anytime you'd like to attend any of those, or if you'd like to kind of engage on these either light or heavy touch engagements and hear the public's perspective directly and hear the same information that we're hearing, we'd be glad and welcome your input and your inclusion in those events as well.
Please keep us posted.
Most definitely.
So that's our presentation for today. We turned 15 minutes into 32. Sorry about that.
Okay.
That's how these conversations go sometimes. Everybody's enthusiastic.
Well, we welcome you aboard. Thank you very much. We're excited to work with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, and we'll sign off and let you continue on with your agenda. Appreciate it. And
Thank you.
hopefully we'll see you around. Yeah.
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay, that brings us to item 6 on the agenda. Budget, Christine.
Yes, the goal of this meeting was not to get approval. The goal was to introduce you to the budget process that we're going to be using, answer any questions, as well as go through the information. Now, I definitely want to thank, I know Patty LaRose is on the call, Tracy Collier. I want to thank them for the hard work. It's really taken a year to get here. And of course, Carol Flint as well for the PSD. There's there's a tool that's used in the state called Power BI. Power BI doesn't necessarily, have all the functionality that we needed. So we had to develop some outboard programming, so to speak. We also, the governor's budget that drives the budget doesn't include the ARPA funds, which is, of course, the largest part of what we're trying to do. So we finally got through all of this. And of course, there was, we didn't understand fully what we were getting for BEAD and all that. But at this point, I'm confident with the numbers that we're about to show you. There's still a disconnect between what we're showing for contracts and what Power BI is showing, and I'll identify that. They're going to get that worked out over the next week or so. So we tried to get that worked out by the end of the day Friday, but apparently there's still some problems there. So I will share my screen and take you through what we're proposing. And again, I think, the board may want to consider a special meeting just to go through the budget, because at this point, I am confident we're going to put a good stake in the ground for next year. We have a review process, and of course, this is the most important work of certainly your executive director, is financial responsibility. So I will share my screen and we'll take you through that. Okay, can you see this budget page? Okay, I see. And is it big enough to see, or do you need it larger?
That works for me.
Okay. So again, the numbers are all accurate except for one on this cover page. So this is what we intend to show you quarterly. The issue on this cover page right now is the contractual is about $1 million short of what we actually have in the budget. And again, PSD staff is trying to figure out where that hole is. So, we'll come in with the board costs, if you look at contractual and personnel, of course, those are the big drivers. So we will present that first level of personnel and board costs on a quarterly basis. The others, I'll be prepared to answer any questions, but I don't think it's necessary to provide you that second level detail of those other items. But if, we'll track them. If they're off track, we'll know why. I will know why. Staff will know why, and we'll present why in our quarterly report. But this is kind of the layout. We've got our operating budget and our capital budget. And this capital budget number is we're feeling pretty confident is accurate for next year as well. And because we know where the funding sources are coming from. And so that's kind of the cover sheet. But one of the things I will show you, which I really like what they've done, let me find that. I think I'll skip down to part of your report is going to show, this is based on this year's numbers from the budget you approved last year. We're going to show you what level, from a straightforward standpoint, you're going to quarterly budget. You're going to want to know, quarterly what we're spending. If we're if we're the first quarter of the year, theoretically, we should spend 25% of the budget. And you'll be able to see in graphic format and from an operating standpoint, quickly where we are in terms of status. So for a board standpoint, this makes it quite easy for you to see visually where we're on track and off track. So I'll pause on that moment from a top level reporting standpoint. I'm just going to shut the screen before I go into the actual budget numbers. I'd like to get some feedback on what you think of this format. Any feedback on this, or can I assume you're happy with it?
It's a huge improvement.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
I'm not entirely clear what your goal is here today, Christine, though. Like you're showing us like the format, and then we're going to talk about budget for next year.
Yes, that's, okay. I wanted to, I wanted to first get some level of agreement or concern about what we're doing in terms of that top level report. And then I will go into the detail of the budget numbers for you next. So any concerns on that top level report? Look okay? Oops.
I mean, a quick look at it, it looks fine. As long as we are able to dig in and drill into any specifics, that's key.
Yep. Okay, good. I'll move on then.
Good.
Okay, so I also will put a caveat here that the I shared this in the board packet, and the personnel cost I actually put under confidential cover, which learned out of an abundance of caution. I've learned since then that we can present that publicly as well. Hang on, I lost my board packet here. Let me find out where it went. I think I just closed out by mistake. Hang on. So my point on the personnel budget is we will make that public as part of the minutes, because that did not necessarily did not need to be private, because these are public numbers. Okay. I also will point out that we will have a grant, a grant detail as part of this quarterly report as well. I don't want to make people dizzy here, but you'll see where we are on this page in terms of grants by CUD, where we are as well. So let's get into the numbers. Again, the two drivers, if you look here, the two biggest drivers of our costs are contractual. Second biggest driver is personnel. So let's talk about contractual and where those funds are proposed to be going. And I'm actually going to zoom in a little deeper on this one. And so what you have in your board packet, which I want you to study well over the next couple of weeks, is we have what the contract is, the budgeted amount, and then of course we'll be talking about the spend by quarter and by year. But at the end of this is somewhere in here is the source funding stream. Yeah, the funding stream is right next to it. So you can see where the money's coming from for each of these contracts. So you look at the contract type, where the money's coming from, the budgeted amount, and then and then we'll show the progress on each one of those. Now these first 5 items are directly related to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items are directly. Yes.
I just want to catch you before you go on. This says total budgeted amount. And you use the phrase the contract amount. Is the total budgeted amount the contract amount over a course of years, or is it just this year's value?
It's this year's value.
Okay.
So
in other words, Vernonburg is going to make more than 703.
No, Christine,
Yeah,
I think
Kristen,
this is
go ahead, Chris.
yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think this
Please.
is the total budgeted amount is the total for the contract, and then it'll be divided out by fiscal year in the subsequent columns.
Okay, thank you.
Really encourage you to change the language from total budget amount to total contract amount, if you don't mind.
Okay. Right.
Christine, this is Tracy. I would just say that some of these contracts are anticipated because it's part of the budget build process. So that is why we can, some of them aren't executed yet, or even RFP, or we haven't been down that road yet for some of the contracts that we're anticipating.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Tracy, and please continue to weigh in, because all right. So the Vernonburg contract is actually split across 2 funding sources. So we have the BEAD. This is all part of the grant funding that we've received today. We've committed funds for this. And if you look at the total contract amount, it's the BEAD amount plus the digital equity amount. So you're looking at, 990 something thousand. And you should know that most of the contracts came in around this amount. I don't want to get into details of each one, but if you look at the cost, nationwide for this effort is, from a standard is we're actually lower than most states, and as far as the RFP goes, they came in pretty much close to each other. So cost did not necessarily become a decision factor between the agents, the companies we selected. Now, asset mapping and data collection is an amount that we've budgeted, and mapping support is an amount that we've budgeted, not necessarily contracted yet for. Have I got that right, Kristen? All right. Yeah, anyway.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So point of those two is the FCC challenge process is a critical part and a required part of the BEAD program. So there's a challenge process. If you look today, we've got, I don't know the exact numbers because they're changing as we go, but we have 60,000 locations on our maps that the FCC does not have on their maps. And again, this is part of the required process is we continue to focus on the challenge process. And there's a couple layers of challenges that we have to go through. We could present, more detail on this, when we get to the detailed budget discussion. We will present why there's such a significant amount there that has big impact for the state. Because if the address is not on the FCC maps, we cannot fund it. So this is a critical part of the budget. Does that make sense? I want to pause there and see if there are any questions about the mapping challenge process at this point. Again, we'll provide you more detail. So we've also allocated $150,000 to work with. We have Northeast Community Action, which is actually they're kind of the stand-in for all the community action agencies. We also are looking to contract with them in the community outreach effort. And we've talked to Vernon Berger about including NECA in the outreach effort. So that has yet to be contracted, but we're proposing that as an amount.
I'm just mystified by this because they already got what, a $550,000 grant to do outreach. Why are we giving them more?
I will be prepared to answer that question at the next budget meeting. I do not. Yeah. So we'll parking lot that question.
Thank you.
Yep. Stone, this is ongoing. Stone has been our GIS contractor. This is ongoing work we're having with Stone. This is about money for continuing to modify and develop our presentation of the data through the GIS dashboard that you've seen. This will continue to be important in terms of, we talk about the metrics and performance. We're using GIS as part of there. Also been working closely with us on the challenge process at this point. They're the ones that are maintaining the VCBB maps. CTC Engineering, they're doing the review of all the CUD engineering plans, so that we're going to continue to use them for that review. And VCUDA capacity, I'm going to have Rob, I'm going to have Rob, why don't you speak to all these NBRC grants, Rob, if you're willing to. So you're the one that's been kind of focusing on this.
Sure, if it's the board's pleasure to get into this amount of detail now versus next time.
My mistake.
Should I take that as a yes or no?
Patty, I actually think that Christine's approach was to simply give us context, and we're going line item by line item. And I don't know that that's really the.
No, I don't think so either. I think
Christine's
Yeah,
intent.
I agree. Let's be high level.
Yeah, all right, thank you. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob, for asking the question. So there's a whole funding stream from NBRC that we'll be utilizing, and there's a funding stream from the USF. Right now, we estimate that there'll be about $700,000 available from the USF per year. With the proposed legislation that's going through the state right now in terms of changing the way the USF, that funding stream will be higher. And we also have residual USF funds available to us. So you're looking at a total of, a total of $5.894 million in total amount of budget, well, contracted amount, I should say. But if you look at this operating budget for next year, we're estimating it to be more like 3.9 million when that comes in. We will send you the revised list of what those are. Kristen, have you got anything more to say about that disconnect?
No, it looks like when Tracy and I were working on this on Friday, it's basically a disconnect between how Power BI is linking up with the underlying spreadsheets, and we just have to figure out what's going on with that. And by we, I really mean Tracy and Patty, because I don't know how to use Power BI. So it's a work in progress. So it's just a matter of getting the right expenses linked into those line items.
Thank you.
Yep.
So that's an overview of the grants. Again, we're going to provide you a revised report with the details, hopefully by the end of this week. But and then we could set up, a time, or we could talk about this in the June meeting, whatever the will of the board is. So at this point, I'll switch to personnel, if that's okay with the board. And these, again, when I present personnel, we're going to present the numbers. They're public numbers. Sorry to make you dizzy here. Let me just close this. So one of the questions that one of the board members had asked, and which I'll identify it when we go here, is, which one of these, there's one function that we share with the PSD, but I'll go through that. Can you all see this personnel budget? Yep, seeing a head shake, yes. So, okay, so basically, we've kind of projected this over 5 years. And the idea is for us, we will continue to project years forward with the board, but have the board vote on the annual budget. So you'll be voting on the SFY 24 budget. But we have got an executive director, we've got a deputy director, we've got a general counsel, and we have a role broadband technical specialist, that's Lucy. We have special project managers, that's Alyssa. We have an administrative services manager that's open right now. That's actually being funded. So on this one, by the way, if you go to the end of this, you will see where the funds are coming from. That administrative services manager is being funding through the Agency of Administration. We do intend to refill that position. We have regulatory compliance, which is funded. I'm sorry, I get into the details. I can't help it. So we have a broadband project. What's that?
Stay high level.
Yeah, stay high level. Broadband project developer, which we've been looking for several months now for. We have a public outreach manager, and now this public outreach manager is actually Heron's job. She's a temp person right now. That's why you see 2 locations for it. That intent was to roll her into a permanent position. Or as defined by this, when I say permanent, it's help me with the term, Kristen.
A staff position instead of a temp position.
It's a full-time position instead of temporary.
Now this grants and contract administration, that's actually what we've been funding with the PSD. That position is open and open for negotiation. We're going to continue to talk to the PSD about what this project is going to go. But the concept was that we would have a grants and contract administration, where the regulatory compliance officer on staff that would be working closely with the CUDs to ensure that they're complying with all federal requirements. On the PSD side, there's a whole set of agency administration requirements that we, it would be, it really is healthy for us to keep those offloaded to the PSD. And it's also important that we have a second look in terms of complying with focusing entirely on what the federal grants require, because we're managing, last time I looked, we're managing 11 different grant sources, and we don't want anything to fall through the cracks. So again, you look at what Kristen's role is to make sure that it rolls up properly and gets to the top level, and then it's the PSD's role to ensure we're complying with that top level. And then we have a digital equity officer who's going to focus on the digitally equity component. That job is posted now. And we have some good candidates. So these are the list. These are positions that the board has approved, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not open for discussion in our budget process. So that's what we intend to discuss in detail with the board. And we request you take a deep dive on this. And we are now really, what I can confidently say, is into what I think is a healthy and formal budgeting process. And we'll be doing the kind of reporting you expect starting with this budget cycle.
So Christine, are you envisioning quarterly reports?
Yes.
Budget cycles going forward?
Yeah, we will be, we'll be looking at it as a staff monthly, but quarterly, what I've been assured, and it wasn't an easy task to get this commitment because the way the processes work, but we've got a whole, a series of commitments from people involved in the process that 1 month following the close of the quarter, we will have an accurate report for the board.
Okay, I think quarterly is a good place to start. In the event we needed more granularity, we could go there, but I think quarterly is a good place to start.
Thank you.
Right, any questions on the budget? We can all look at the material provided to us, and if we have any questions, we can ask that at the next meeting, but at this point, this is just a presentation to go over the draft, the structure of it, and if we have any immediate reactions to relay those. If not, we'll vote on it next month.
Yes, and I'd like, please relay any questions through to Pat, Patty and myself individually the questions can go to, but try not to copy the rest of the board because I think there's an open meeting law issues there.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. I want to check with Tony on that to make sure I've got that right. I've made an assumption. Tony, as far as board sharing, we've been under the impression that the board can't necessarily share their emails with the entire board because of an open meeting conflict. So you don't need to answer that now, but I just want to let you know that's an assumption I have. It may not be correct.
Yes, that doesn't strike me as being necessary, but I'll look into it further.
Okay, and then you could share with the board what
Okay.
the policy on that should be.
All right, excellent. Any questions left for the budget? All right, let's move along. Let's do staff updates.
Yeah. Why don't we start? Go ahead, Rob, give the general VCBB update.
You're muted, Rob.
Someday I'll get that correct. It's busy as can be. We are currently hiring for 3 separate positions. We have 30 candidates for one, 58 for another, and 10 for another. So the hiring process can become a full-time job in the state of Vermont, but we are working through and will ideally have decisions made and candidates to introduce at the next board meeting. We continue to work through the FCC challenge process. There's a back and forth that happens with providers. Most providers have been very open, very willing to compromise. Other providers have not responded at all to the challenges. There was 21,853. These are availability challenges. We have just crossed the threshold of apparently we just went from 5,302 to 5,316 during the board meeting. So we are winning challenges. Each of those challenges could be worth anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000, depending on how the rest of the country does. So that's, I think that's doing the math real quick, 16 to $22 million of additional funding that we may have secured by participating in the challenge process. So that's been a big thing. Of course, we're continuing working with the CUDs as 4 more CUDs are in the process where we will likely see construction grant applications in the next 2 months. We have been engaging with the CUDs on issues related to make ready and pole replacement. I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Vacuda. We've been engaging with the legislature in terms of just finalizing the language related to the escrow account, the functional equivalent of a letter of credit for the middle mile application, which we are still awaiting word on, like everybody else. But we are also engaging with our contractors and with the CUDs on all the issues related to gap funding and potentially other low cost funding down the line to finish these projects. There's a lot that's happening at this point, and we will have more to report in the next few months. Making progress across the board on many items, but overwhelmed as usual. But we're getting through. We have an amazing staff, and we're making it happen.
Yeah, okay, and as far as the dashboard review, unfortunately, Matthews's mom is in serious health issues and in hospice, so she's not here today. So we're going to pass on that at this point. And communications and media, go ahead, Heron.
Hi, thank you, Christine. In the last couple of weeks, we've had some coverage on DV Fiber's construction contract with Surtech Broadband Solutions. There was a piece about EC Fiber's history, where they are now, and their goals for the future. Last week, there was Vermont Public story about state efforts to ensure oversight over public dollars. And then there were several stories recently on Southern Vermont CUDs being set to reach universal coverage this fall. That kind of sums it up. I have everything updated on the website. If you're interested in reading any of those articles, the links are all there for you.
Yeah, talk about the Facebook page as well as the work we're doing with the PSD as maybe can add that too.
That's right. Julie Raboyne has come on with the PSD and as an outreach manager. She's working with them. She's working with us for part of her time as well. And I've worked with her to talk about our social media effort. And she has a lot of experience with social media and is eager to get going on that. And so she has set up a Facebook page for us, which we did not have before. We currently, or before that, had LinkedIn and Twitter, which we're going to continue. We've had a few issues with our LinkedIn page that we're working through, but she has set up a Facebook page. So I'd encourage everyone to go check that out and like that page. We feel like, especially with our outreach and engagement for our VEED planning, that's going to be a really effective way to reach many of the stakeholders in the state who we want to hear from. And so we'll link up with some of the community groups who have a lot of following, and we think that'll be a great way to reach out as well as build our presence. So that's kind of an exciting thing that's happening that we are working to push forward as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff?
No, thank you all, staff. Everybody's doing a great job. All right, that brings us to Vacuda updates. Is Rob still with us?
I am, and I've got a couple slides for you. Not now. Let's see if this works. Oh, here we go. Just give me one quick second here. Here we go. Okay, can you all see that? Great. Well, thank you all. And, we prepared this not fully understanding the conversation would happen related to the auditor's report. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about accountability more broadly. And this was actually in anticipation of upcoming grants and kind of the historical conversation about what we could do around the topic of accountability. So we covered a lot of this as part of the auditor's report, but just to frame it, it was different. And Patty, I want to, kind of applaud and thank you for your comments at the start about the opportunity to collaborate on this. What you'll see, the punchline in this is we'd love an opportunity to collaborate, and you've already offered that. And so we're grateful and look forward to that. But in our conversations since the last time this group met, we've had 6 or 8 conversations with CUD leaders about accountability. And one of the things that came up in those conversations was the complexity of the conversation itself and all the different relationships that exist within our ecosystem. And in a sense, in this chart where you see the VCBB and its obligations to statute and ARPA and BEAD and other grant funds and the CUDs and the towns and the regulators and the contractors and the creditors and all the other folks involved, that really we could write accountability expectations for each one of these blue lines in each direction that it goes, in terms of documented expectations that make the ecosystem work. And so, that was what really came up, and it pointed out to us that there's a lot of work that we can do here to document expectations over time, and that each one of us has different roles in accountability in the ecosystem. And also, one of the things that came through every conversation was we are mostly aligned that what we are all about, because we are all mission driven, is protecting the long-term interests of Vermont citizens. So we've met a bunch of times. There were a bunch of different interpretations of the problem statement around accountability that we were trying to solve for. And I would say that as we get beyond the auditor's report and we talk more broadly about this topic of accountability, being really discreet with here's a problem statement, let's solve it. Here's a new problem statement, let's solve it, I think will help. I actually think in some ways that we haven't talked about this with our group, obviously, but the different policies you proposed in the other document actually give us a framework to kind of start breaking this into smaller chunks and working on it. So that's great. I think one of the other things that came up was this conversation about the timeliness. There are interests for accountability related to grant funds in the moment we're in and doing a good job in stewarding those. And then there's the long-term interest that as companies get bought out, relationships, people change, and time goes on, that we have an opportunity now. We have an opportunity now to assure that there is accountability as all those changes happen over the next.
Nothing to prove to me, Mr. Mann.
Someone is not muted. Can Rob shout this?
It's Rick Rothmeimer. I don't know if anyone can mute him. Okay.
How about we talk about it when you can see without screaming?
I still can't. Oh, there we go.
If everybody can.
I just took care of it.
Thank you, Rob. So this was one that just, look, that accountability is core to the mission and brand and success of what the CUDs are trying to do. So, we look forward to these conversations. High standards, I will send you these slides, again, pointing out that the CUDs have additional accountability obligations, and that, in making this ecosystem work, we want to make sure that setting accountability is done in the right place, and that that we have the right controls for all of these things. I actually think that we talked about this a bit today in the prior conversation, so appreciate that we're mostly aligned on that. We talked about the competitive environment and that well-intended constraints can limit, the ability to thrive. And then finally, I learned this from a prior boss. It's one of my favorite lines in one of these conversations, that, we want to establish great controls. We want to avoid bad control. And so, we can get into that as we get into some of the subgroups and working groups. But then the last one was, I think this is spot on with what we talked about earlier. A series of workshops would be a great way to do this. A number of the CUD leaders expressed how important this is to them, and that they're willing to put time into this with you all in whatever format makes sense. One of the other things that came through in these conversations across the CUD leaders is, we're now at a place where we have a really talented group of executive directors and top advisors across the CUDs. They don't see everything exactly the same, and that's actually a good thing in this context. A really rich set of knowledge and experience, and hundreds of years of experience in this field in terms of thinking about how to make sure that we avoid problems that have happened to each of us in our prior lives. And so a lot of opportunity to leverage the stakeholders across the ecosystem. One of the things we talked about was that, especially with some of these contracts that are going to have a duration in decades, that there's an opportunity to kind of bring additional world-class talent to those, and really treat them for the vehicles that they're going to be for the state for a long, long time. That essentially it would be short money to invest more in those contracts to make sure that they anticipate protecting public interests for all the money we're going to spend through the grant programs. And then, we talked about accountability measures and processes. The last one, I think, is something that really deserves some more discussion. We've had a number of really interesting conversations about the assumption that public infrastructure is foundational for accountability, and that in the way Act 71 was crafted, there are a number of things that drive towards that. But there was also recognition in our conversation that even with private providers in the line extension case, we can protect some of the same aspects of public infrastructure that protect us if those companies change over time. And so anyway, this was just kind of intended to give you a flavor of the depth and complexity of the conversations that the CEDs have had on this, and to ask for collaboration. I think that is what we're talking about doing anyway. And so we're grateful for that. And I've got 2 more slides on Make Ready, but I'll stop there because I talked a lot.
Rob, I really appreciate you sending these slides around to us. And you've made a lot of commentary that's focused on, of course, we're all in this together. And of course, we all want the same thing, which I think is fundamentally true. But that's kind of where the lack of definition is accountability for what?
Agreed.
And I really appreciate that there's some piece of this that is centered on the CUD's ability to manage its contracts, its vendors, its costs. That's great. But I think there is work to be done even in understanding what the public interest is.
We completely agree with that, Holly, and I don't think anyone, I would even go farther and say that we expect that you all have some things that you're specifically responsible for being accountable for and to hold us accountable for, and we welcome that. And we have some things to do. I think one of the things here was that this is nuanced, and there are a lot of relationships, and it's worth taking the time to really talk through exactly as you said each one of those.
And here I was hoping to encourage you to just give us the answer.
Yeah, and if we're going to do this right, and it's worth it to do it right, it's going to take a little more effort than that. And it's welcome. I heard a number of people say they're willing to put the time to this. It's important. Okay, my last slide was just an update on the Make Ready conversation that we've been having with you all. And there is one utility company that we are seeing Make Ready estimates come through that are not what we expect in aspects of total cost, compliance with the timeframes that are set up in the regulations under 3.700. We're having some, when we question costs, sometimes the accuracy of the bills and the formatting of them makes it very difficult to understand what we're being asked to pay for. And then, finally, there's a picture here of a pole that one of the CUDs was asked to fund the replacement of. This pole is 80 years old. And, we believe there should be some apportionment of cost for some of those poles that the ratepayers have contributed towards the funds to help replace over time. And so we're working on this. We have a meeting set with the Department of Public Service on Friday, June 10th. I believe the CUDs and all utilities are welcome at it from a Vicuda perspective, we're really focused right now on the one that's kind of an outlier on these 4 topics, and we're preparing for that. And just what does preparing look like? We are collecting data across the CUDs that highlight these trends and formatting them so that we can make succinct arguments with them. We have onboarded some expert assistants to help us organize those arguments and get ready for likely inquiries from regulators, et cetera. And we're continuing to talk with the utility and hoping for a collaborative breakthrough. As this plays out in early June, we will start having firm numbers on kind of the impact across the CUG projects of what we're seeing. And, again, we believe it's in the public interest to make sure that the dollars we're spending are being spent wisely and that we can track back through these estimates to the individual expenses, have a process that's a little bit more transparent in terms of what we're being asked to pay for. I'm choosing my words very carefully here. We are not judgmental yet about whether this is wrong or not, but we do feel that it's significant enough dollars, in the millions of dollars, that it deserves the attention and scrutiny to make sure that we've got it right. So I think that's it. That will happen before you all meet again, and so we would certainly offer, if anyone's interested, we can provide updates between now and then. That's it for me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any questions of Rob? All right, hearing none. Good presentation, Rob.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is public comment. Christine, or do you want to have Rob do that? You're muted, Christine.
Yeah, I'll be glad to take that. Anybody has public comment, please feel free to raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, you can weigh in, but this is the public comment part. You'll be allowed up to 3 minutes to speak. And do we have anybody from the public who wants to make a comment at this point? I'll say going once. Oh, Rob's raising your hand. So go ahead, Rob.
So I just had an email from Krista, and she was unable to join us. She went to the hospital with her mom, but she did want to make comments about accountability, and she may be sending you all an email about that as a follow-up.
Okay, we'll share that email both with the board and publicly. And yeah, so other comments? Going once, going twice, back to the board.
Okay, next item on our list is parking lot.
Yes, so let me pull that up. Hang on. Okay, I'm just sharing my screen. So on the parking lot, we had one item on there. It's a response to the auditor's report. But, of course, we talked about enforceability of the partners. We closed that one because we had that discussion at April 10th, and that rolls into the auditor's report and the discussion we're having at the board at this point. We have a number of issues that came up today we'll take note of and include in the next board meeting after we review the minutes and listen to the recording again. So is there anything else major that should be on here that the board is?
Yeah, so Christine, if you can take my item for the board, the auditor's report, now change that to a timeline of policies to tackle. I just want to keep this on task so that we don't lose sight of it. So change it to the next step if you can.
We will do that.
Excellent. And I will send out a copy of the new version right after this meeting.
Great, thank you.
Right. Anything else for parking lot? All right, our next meeting is June 12th. Hopefully everybody has that on their calendars. And with that, I'm going to move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, Dan seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned at 3:18. Thank you very much, and we'll see everybody on June 12th.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.